Hello and good morning or good afternoon, whenever you guys are watching this. Um, Thank you for attending. My name is Mike Cruz. I work at Old Colony Hospice and Palliative Care. And for the next little while, I'll be walking you through caring for the caregiver, compassion fatigue. And a lot of people think they may have heard about this a little bit. It's a lot different than stress or caregiver burnout. And we're going to go through a lot of that stuff. And hopefully, by the end of this, you'll be able to do a few different things. First and foremost, be able to describe what's going on with compassion fatigue, how to identify it, but then also how to work back from it. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, a couple of things to, let's see if this will click. There we go. Of course, the disclosure statement. I have no relevant financial or non-financial disclosures to talk about. I will disclose that my kids' friends think I'm cool. So that's something. Next up is the title slide here. Like I mentioned, we're going to talk about caring for the caregiver, compassion fatigue. We will define compassion fatigue. We're going to demonstrate the understanding. So these are those key objectives that we need to have put into any presentation to make sure we're on target. We'll talk about some of the misconceptions, identify some of the warning signs, and also identify some of the ways, resources, interventions to combat and bounce back from any type of compassion fatigue. So just to make sure we're all in the same space, we're going to go through some of these definitions. First is stress, right? So stress, if you just look at the definition, is a non-specific response to the human organism on any demand placed upon it. So anything's going to create stress upon you. It's just how you handle it. And typically when we talk about stress, it is a physical component of what happens with doing any type of task, right? So we don't want to confuse just generalized stress as compassion fatigue. Then there's also suffering. So suffering is a state of severe distress, and that's associated with events that can threaten the intactness of a person. So we're going to skip ahead by one slide and then come back to compassion, because I want to talk a little bit more about suffering. So this is the total pain experience. We talk a lot about this in hospice and palliative care because we want to make sure we delineate stress or even just pain as what someone, in reference to comparing to what someone really goes through when they have an advanced chronic and or progressive disease. And so when we look at that, we've got kind of this upper left quadrant here where we're talking about the physical contribution. And that's what we mostly think about when we think about pain and suffering and even stress. It's more of the physical stuff we think about. It could be different types of pain. It could be loss of sleep, but also there's physical parts that come along with it. So you might be adding adaptive equipment. You might have someone who has an amputation and there's some type of disfigurement, and even having to change one's environment so they can actually navigate it are all parts of this physical contribution that goes to pain. That's not just the physical pain that comes along with disease process or an acute injury. There's also these other quadrants here that we want to make sure we think of when we're thinking about someone's total pain experience. And that's the social contribution. So when something happens or disease progresses, there are changes, and those changes can affect someone's self-image, their confusion with their new roles within their personal relationships, their family roles, their work roles. Even financial concerns can start to become an issue with this social component, if they need to lean on someone else or even the community. And then there's the thought of becoming a family burden as well. So that's just a kind of a social part of it. But then on the bottom left here, we've even got an emotional component where there's anxiety. So anxiety is just fear of future pain and anxiety, right? People are thinking about what might happen next and what is going to happen and how it's going to make me feel. If left untreated, those things can lead to depression. We can just have, again, that generalized stress can land here too. But then there's the loss of function, loss of relationships. So there's a lot of emotional components that happen with someone's suffering. And then there's even a component on the right bottom here of spiritual components where there is a question around the meaning of it all. Why is God allowing this to happen? What have I done to deserve this? Why is this happening to me? So those feelings around guilt, punishment, and what this all means with your faith community, and are we connected to something greater? This all goes in to someone's total pain and or their suffering. So when we're talking about compassion fatigue, what we're working with is somebody else's suffering and how it affects us as caregivers. And there's a lot more of an impact than maybe people might think. And so we'll talk about that. So getting back to that previous definition, we want to talk, not just about the stress and the suffering, but also the compassion, right? That's the third major definition that we want to get a good grasp on. So compassion is a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by suffering, right? Or misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the pain or remove its cause. Now, a lot of you that are listening to this and reading through the slides, you are in the positions that you are because you do have some level of compassion. If you didn't, you likely wouldn't have made it this far. If you're still in orientation, good luck. Hope you have enough compassion and you stick around for a real long time because we need compassionate people out there. So knowing those definitions, let's get into one more definition here. So this is more kind of an addition to it, but there's times when a person providing direct care to suffering people, again, that word suffering, patients and families, and they can become overwhelmed or even feel unrewarded. And that's when we really start to get to this place called compassion fatigue, when the suffering of other folks start to overwhelm and have us feel unrewarded as caregivers, that we're not being appreciated, that we're not making a difference. And those are some of the symptoms that we'll talk about. But here's the last definition I really want to make sure that we talk about. And it's actually, it's right here. It's more of a description than a definition. But I like to think of compassion fatigue as the emptying of your compassion well. So everybody has a definitive amount. So there's not an infinite amount of compassion that anyone has any given day. We all have a definitive amount of compassion. Just want to make sure we're still recording here. Yep. And throughout the course of the day, as you are giving out compassion, it starts to empty. And we need to do things in order to fill that well back up, because when we start to get to the bottom, then we start feeling those feelings of resentment and uselessness and negativity that can really be part and parcel of what compassion fatigue makes us feel like, but also can cause us to not be quality care providers. So just to review the description here, it says, it's a well of caring in which individuals are giving out a great deal of energy and compassion to others over a period of time, yet aren't able to get enough back to reassure themselves that the world is a hopeful place. So again, just envision that each and every one of us has a certain amount of compassion within us in that well. And as you go through the course of the day, typically you're able to give out a ton of compassion as you're first starting your shift, or if you're actually a personal caregiver and you're starting with your loved one new and fresh the next day, you're really able to give a lot. But as the day goes on and on and on, the well starts to diminish. So we need to try to identify what are those things that cause that well to displace, and then what can we do to refill it throughout the day so we don't bottom out. Makes sense, right? So what compassion fatigue really isn't is we shouldn't really confuse it with stress or burnout. Burnout really is that physical component, and it comes with working, um, um, physically. Compassion fatigue also has a faster onset of symptoms. So when we're talking about physical burnout that someone might have and doing a landscaping job, or even if we're a home health aide and we're just pulling people in and out of bed all day, those are things you can physically get burnt out on. But compassion fatigue, and those things can take a long time to happen. But compassion fatigue typically has a faster onset than your typical physical burnout, but it's highly treatable. And once we know the signs and symptoms, we can really come back from it pretty quickly. Versus burnout, it can come on over time. And typically, if it's physically burnout, you might actually, pull your back out, or something physically happens, and it takes a lot longer to come back from. So the good news is about compassion fatigue is that it is very, very treatable, but we just need to make sure we're aware of those symptoms because they can come on relatively quickly. So a little words about some professional caregiving vulnerability as professional caregivers, but also personal caregivers if we're taking care of a loved one at home. We deal with people that are under acute stress. They have a loss of their own physical abilities. Their ability to cope has been compromised. And so if you think of maybe even how we act when we're not feeling well, sometimes it's really hard for us to cope. And it's really a difficult thing to do that. And sometimes we forget to be kind individuals when we have a limited ability to cope with what's happening. Another vulnerability of caregivers is that the product that we are delivering is ourself. So, if someone doesn't like they just bought a car, the product isn't performing as they thought it was, or that the salesman told them it would, there's a complaint with the product, perhaps, right? The cable's not working properly. There's a problem with the cable. It's not necessarily the person that you have to call to fix it. It's not their actual fault. But when you are a caregiver, you are the product. So if it's not appreciated, if it's not understood, the amount that you are dishing out of your well every single day, that compassion, that empathy, that caring, that you are not a good product. You are not a good caregiver because you're not getting the feedback, or you're getting more negative feedback than you normally would be because of somebody's limited ability to cope. Another vulnerability is the human need is infinite, and people can continually ask and ask and ask upon you. And people always think you always think you can give a little more. And the people that we care for always feel that they might be able to ask a little more. And that's a bad way to continue a caregiver to patient or resident or whomever we're working with relationship. Caregivers may also have unresolved issues activated by similar issues in their patients and families that they already know. So somebody who has an issue with maybe drug abuse or personal life choices, some people have problems, and it makes them less of a caregiver with some of those people. So sometimes we need to switch up caseloads and who's helping who out, because some of the people we care for might be very old, and they might have very different opinions. And we might need to navigate around those things and accommodate them, because especially if they're towards the end of life, it's not likely that they're going to go ahead and change how they've been treating people based on how they see them. So sometimes we need to make sure that we line people up with people who are going to treat our caregivers good too. Because if we send out a caregiver who has a family member who's has a history of substance abuse, and we send them in to care for somebody who is currently abusing, it can be a real difficult situation for them to be an appropriate caregiver. And can we actually expect them to provide the amount of care and compassion and empathy that's needed for that person if we send them into a situation where the activity of the person they're caring for um, doesn't work well with their history. So we need to think about that as a professional caregiver, and even personal caregivers too. And the other vulnerability that we want to make sure we talk about is that caregivers, especially professional ones, are fulfilling a handful of different roles. We're filling out paperwork sometimes on people, and the more work we do with them, the more paperwork we need to do, or if they need a specific type of equipment, sometimes we need to put aside time now to actually do the prior authorizations, any number of conflicting roles that might come up as we're professional caregivers. So these are all things that cause us as professional caregivers to be uniquely vulnerable to those components of our own stress and suffering. So some of the misconceptions that we have as caregivers, a lot of caregivers, especially personal ones, people who are taking care of their loved ones at home, they think that they can make everything okay. They can just fix it all. And they could save their loved one's world. My uncle took care of my grandmother, and he thought that he could fix everything and do it all. And he ended up in the hospital 3 different times while caring for her because he did not take care of himself or ask for help. We need to make sure we understand that there is a limit on what we can do and can fix, especially as diseases progress normally. It's going to need more effort on the caregiver, and to think that we can continue to either fix it, mask it, put Band-Aid on it. We can't make everything okay. The march of time goes on, and we're going to need more help. And at some point, that compassion well is going to empty. A lot of caregivers think that they're responsible for the outcomes. Again, we have to kind of temper that thought with, yeah, we're responsible for how people do day to day. But in the end, the diseases are going to progress, and to think that we're responsible for the ultimate outcomes in the long term, it's silly. A lot of people think if I care enough, everything's just going to be okay. It's just kind of hoping things will be great. And that doesn't help anyone long term. The other big one here is this fourth one down. The sufferer, the person who's going through the suffering, will appreciate everything I do for them. So the one consistent thing that we see in healthcare is, people with that limited ability to cope seldom say thank you, or they show appreciation for the work you're doing for them and with them, because sometimes that's uncomfortable for them, and we're having to do things that might be a little bit uncomfortable, or are not too dignified, depending on where we are in a disease process. So for us as caregivers to think that the person going through the suffering is going to actually appreciate what we're doing, or at least the big things, is silly. So we have to, again, temper our expectations of the folks who are going through the suffering, because they're not going to appreciate everything that you do. A lot of caregivers think that if they have enough resources, time, money, material, skills, that we're going to fix everything. Again, that goes back to the first one. We can't fix it, especially in the long term. The next one is a real good one too, to be aware of, that significant people in your lives will support and approve of your absence from your relationship while you invest in intensive caregiving. So a lot of people don't understand the amount of compassion and caring and empathy that it takes. They might just see that you work in a rehab hospital, or in a home health agency, or at a nursing home, wherever a lot of us work in healthcare. And we're inside, it's air conditioned, we're not exposed to the elements. So a lot of people think we've got it good, but they don't understand how much this can take out of you. And people who aren't in caregiving are not going to approve of your absence and your energy being put other places. So it's important to talk with people about that are important to you. A lot of people know what they're getting into, especially if it's a similar diagnosis. Like, oh yeah, I've taken care of 7 other patients with this disorder. I know what I'm getting into. And as soon as you start to think that, that's when someone throws you a curveball, and half of your well of compassion has left, and it's only 9:30 in the morning. A lot of people think they can do it alone, just like my uncle did. And some people even think that if I'm spiritual enough, if we pray enough, that we can get through it all and help the suffering people. Well, again, we can't do it alone, and spiritual, kind of leaning into your spiritual life and faith can be helpful, but it's not going to fix everything. Okay. All right, so now we've got through those definitions, we've got through what things aren't, we've got through some of those defining of the misconceptions of caregivers. Let's get into some of those symptoms of compassion fatigue. So let's start to identify what those things are, so then we can start to identify when our well's getting low, identify how close we are, and then we'll jump into how do we fix those things. So some of the generalized physical symptoms of compassion fatigue are being unable to sleep well, right? You can't get to sleep because you're still thinking about work. You're waking up early because you can't stop thinking about the work you have to do the next day. And even sometimes having work dreams, you have a dream about work because you're really not leaving it at work. You can have headaches, backaches. This all goes into, all those major components of caregiving can cause those things. Feeling tired most of the time, physically drained. Someone can have changes in weight. Some people will use food as a crutch and continue to eat more. And other people will actually forget to eat, or they feel like they don't have time to eat, and they'll actually lose weight. And for either of those two changes, up or down in weight, people will get also lingering colds, because at some point with the lack of sleep and the changes in diet, or not eating a healthy diet, your immune system takes a hit, and you're more likely to have lingering colds, and flus are more likely to kind of get stuck, and we start to have our own health issues because of the physical symptoms of compassion fatigue. So what are some of the emotional parts of this? Some of the symptoms that come up with compassion fatigue. You can become easily irritated or frustrated, right? When you think about when you don't have enough compassion or empathy or caring, frustration can start to come in. You might think that somebody else you work with has an easier caseload. The folks that they're working with are easier residents to work with. And that goes into anger and resentment too. You could be resenting other people because of what they have, and not the help that you have. Sadness, feeling like you're alone, that can be a real big indicator that you're starting to have compassion fatigue, that no one's there to help you. Also, if you're feeling overwhelmed or overloaded, those are pretty good terms to describe being overwhelmed or overloaded. That's really what you can feel when your well starts to run low. Those things can also continue to go into a decreased self-esteem and wondering, if you're actually good at this. Should you be doing this? And then even depression, where you feel like you're not adding any benefit to the folks that you're working with. That means you're really starting to bottom out if you're feeling depressed over your caregiving. And then in general, just feeling that emotional drain that can happen when we're providing care to people who need a lot of care, right? So having that emotionally drained feeling is a big emotional component that happens with compassion fatigue. So we have a little handout here. I'll try to send them. So hopefully you've got these in hand. If not, you can just kind of read along if you're looking at this remotely. But hopefully you have these in hand. And we'll go through them. So this is a self-assessment, so we can see how close we are to the bottom of our well, and are we experiencing compassion fatigue. So on this left side, we're not going to concentrate on the right side here for now. We'll come back to the right side. But on the left side here, you've got these symptoms. And so we'll go through them, and as we do, just kind of either mentally check, or if you've got it in front of you, you can take a pen or pencil and just kind of check off the ones that you feel like, this is just for you. You're not going to hand this in. and just see which ones resonate with you. See which ones you've found yourself feeling. Um, and then we'll kind of talk about it. So the first one here says, I feel my patients stress very deeply. So that means you're starting to get some of that suffering that they're having, and you're really starting to feel that in your own self. You're not being protected by the compassion that you have. You find small changes very draining. Those are, changes that normally wouldn't drain you. Now they start to drain you. That could be a symptom. I've lost my sense of being hopeful. That's a big symptom. If you're losing hope for those you're caring for, I mean, even in hospice care, we talk about hope. It's not hope that they're going to survive their disease or live forever. It's hope that they don't go to the hospital again. It's hope that family and friends get to have those final conversations with them. So losing that hopefulness is a sign. You have outbursts or of anger or irritability. Again, that means you're starting to get frustrated and starting to even have outbursts against other, maybe coworkers, or maybe it's even the person you're caring for. Some people, when they have compassion fatigue, will startle easily, especially where it's something that wouldn't normally startle you. Some people feel that their coworkers lack understanding. Again, that goes back into the resentment. Some people say that they feel weak, tired, and run down because of their work with patients and families, because you're not just working with some of these residents, patients, you're also working with their families. You're educating them on what's happening. You're guiding them along to show them what we need to do next. And that can really empty out your well even further in working with families. You feel a little compassion towards patients, families, and coworkers. You can find it difficult to separate your work life from your personal life, like you're constantly thinking about what's happening at work, even in your personal life. You can feel overwhelmed by unfinished personal business, like you can't get to your bills, you can't get to cleaning out the leaves, right? The things you need to do, work is taking too much of it, or too much of your attention is being drawn to, too much of your compassion is being drawn to your work. You have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, or again, even having work dreams. That's a symptom. You feel that there's no one to talk to about working with dying patients, or patients with advanced progressive disease. Or you even have thoughts that you are a failure as a caregiver. And that really means that, you've really emptied out your well there, and you feel like you have nothing left to give. And that's a real big symptom. So it says at the bottom here, if you exhibit 4 or more of these symptoms, you may be experiencing compassion fatigue. So I think you shouldn't look at, is it 4? I think each and every one of us has a different amounts of, a different depth of compassion within us. Some people, I think, have more. I think some people have less. I think if we're honest with ourselves, I think we know which one we are, if we have more or less. But the idea is to know. And so you might have 4 symptoms, but you've got a really deep well, and so you're fine. But someone might have just 3 of those and have a bit of more of a shallow well, and it is not, it's not good, and they're already kind of bottomed out. So we got to make sure that we just be mindful that everybody has a different size well. Before we get into these remedies, I like to kind of just jump to this slide real quick, and talk about, once we realize, when we've acknowledged some of those symptoms, the physical, the emotional, and those ones from the checklist, the first step is to recognize that you're feeling empty. That's the very first step, to recognize that you're having some of those symptoms, right? Because once you're able to acknowledge that you have some compassion fatigue, then we can start to do things to bring ourselves back. One of the big things to do is kind of just separate yourself. Spend some time alone each day, even if it's for 5 minutes after you've had a couple of patients or residents that you've been working with. Sometimes you even need 5 minutes to just regroup yourself. And I have a whole slide on 5-minute things that you can do to refill your well. We'll go through those in a minute. Other general things to think about is to start new daily habits that re-energize your mind and body, right? Whatever that is for you, make time for it. And make sure there's a connection with your family, friends, and coworkers, right? We all need to lean on somebody, like we talked about when we're providing compassion and empathy and caring. We want to make sure we're working with our families, friends, and coworkers to refill that, and use humor when acknowledging your limits. I mean, there's only so much we can do. I know it doesn't, you know, I work for Old Colony Hospice and Palliative Care, and you think that it's, 100% of the time, it's a very solemn group of folks. You know, when we're not working directly with patients and families, we try our best to laugh and tell jokes and talk about things that really do refill our well. So using humor, especially when we're acknowledging the limits of what we can do, is important. And we want to make sure we let go of any idealistic thoughts that we have about what we can do and how we can really fix things, like we talked about earlier. So those are just kind of the generalized. Well, let's go into some more specific ones. And now we're going to jump into that self-assessment again and go through the right side with our compassion fatigue remedies. So you want to steal a moment every day for yourself. A lot of folks are comfortable with meditation nowadays. If you haven't meditated before, I've done it, and I did it for a long time. Lately, I think I need to do more of it. But meditation is really just thinking about and focusing on your breathing and kind of trying to let go mentally of everything else. So finding some time for yourself to meditate, to just breathe and think about your breathing, can do a lot to let things settle, and that can draw some compassion back into your well. Pamper yourself. Plan anything that makes you feel good, right? That's the second one down in that right column. Even just the planning of it and the idea that there is a future good plan can help to refill your well. Putting your mind on play. So that's if you've ever driven anywhere and then you get there and you kind of don't remember driving there when you're sober, God forbid. That's your mind on play, right? The next one down, plan a dinner with a fun friend. Don't plan it with an unfun friend. It's got to be fun. Because that way, you're able to, again, find somebody who you can talk with about it. That's fun and has humor, and then you can really refill your well with somebody and help to refill their well. So plan a dinner with a fun friend. Talk to a coworker, family member, or friend about your feelings. It's more often than not, if you can talk to another caregiver about what's happening, a caregiver, you're more likely to get that empathy from them, and they can help refill your well, and you can do likewise. If it's somebody who doesn't do a lot of caregiving, sometimes they're not as good at acknowledging what's happening, but still, anyone who's a good listener can be helpful. Eat sensibly, exercise, get a good night's sleep. Yeah, if we could, that'd be great. Again, it's one of the remedies. Sometimes it's not always the easiest one to do, but take time off. So some of us, we can take a week off for vacation. Sometimes it's a long weekend. But even in the middle of the day, if we can take 5 minutes, and you can ask one of your coworkers and say, hey, listen, I just had a real long time dealing with Mrs. Jones. I really could just choose 5 minutes to collect myself. We should, especially after this and acknowledging what we have learned from this, we should be able to be nice to one another and give each other 5 minutes to kind of collect ourselves and refill our wells, so we can be good caregivers throughout the day. So take that time off. Again, week, great. Can't do that. Weekend's good. Can't do that. Then even 5 minutes is great. The next one's a good one. Take a long walk and be a part of nature. This is really important, and there's two hard parts to this. The first part is to actually get up and go for the walk. Some of us we don't want to get up and do something else, put on our sneakers and go for a walk. But the other hard part about it is coming back, because once you get out there and you're walking, even in some of this cold air, it feels good. Your blood gets going and circulating, and maybe listening to birds or the rustling of leaves, and it's soothing. And those types of things are things that can refill your well. So coming back can sometimes be a difficult part of going for that walk. Sometimes we need to examine our caregiving motivations and remember why we started doing this in the first place. Sometimes that could be a good refocus and help to fill our well back up. Attending to your spiritual and creative life. There's lots of us who use faith and rely on faith, but a lot of us have creative parts of our lives, whether it's painting, could be meditation, it could be yoga, lots of things that we do to our creative life. Also, we can adopt new lifestyle habits that will increase our emotional health. So maybe that is taking on a different diet or meditation. We also need to identify what is important in our lives and live in a way that reflects it. Right. So a lot of self-examination, make sure we're doing things to stack our deck to be in a good position to give compassion out throughout the day. And cultivate a positive life and nourishing relationships. And sometimes that might mean getting rid of relationships that aren't so nourishing, if those things are possible. I mean, sometimes we have people in our lives that really drain our well even before we get to be our professional caregiver selves. And that's not going to help you personally, right? It's not going to help you personally in your own relationships, but it's not going to allow you to be a good caregiver throughout the day. And lastly, here it says, seek someone you can talk to. And again, whether it's a coworker, great, but there's a lot of professionals that we can see to talk about how we're feeling, to talk about our motivations, to talk about why we feel certain ways that are professionals. And a lot of that stuff we can even do online, remotely on Zoom, to make sure we have our mental health taken care of and not just our physical health. So those, I mean, the previous slide and that whole right side there, that's not the end of it. There might be things that and you do that bring you and fulfill and refill your well of compassion and caring. I mean, for a lot of us, I think it might be on here somewhere else too, but for me, music is a real big thing that can stop any of those symptoms in their track and really help to refill my well, even in like kind of a 5-10 minute clip of just sitting down and listening to some music. So think about not just what's on this list, but the things that you do in your life when you're feeling frustrated, resented, that you don't have any compassion or caring left. What are the things that you usually do, and make sure you make time for those. So again, we talked about these other interventions just a minute ago. Other interventions, and this leads us to the 5-minute pick-me-ups that I wanted to talk about. Again, take that regularly scheduled time off. You need to take time off. No one can work and do everything forever. And we work in a society where, especially up in New England, where we really pride ourselves on our work ethics, right? But we need to take that time off, especially if we're caregivers. And you always have to think about this. The scenario when you're on a plane, right? You need to the oxygen masks drop. You need to put your mask on first, right? You need to take care of yourself first so you can care for others. Because if you don't, you won't be there to take care of others. So make sure you take that scheduled time off, and don't feel guilty about it when you're leaving those you're caring for to recoup, right? Get regular scheduled time off. Weekend, even if it's a day, or again, even if it's for an hour or even 5-minute clips. If you need that schedule, you need to kind of schedule that stuff in there, knowing what you know about your own personal well of compassion. You got to renounce perfectionism. I think those of us who are getting older, like me, as we get older, we realize how silly perfectionism is. And so earlier on that you can renounce perfectionism. You still want to do a good job, but when we're talking about caregiving and helping with the people with progressive disease. To be perfect is really, really tough. Also consider support groups, right? So we have a lot of folks who will go to Alzheimer's support groups if they're helping to care for someone with Alzheimer's, but also cancer caregiver support groups in any number of facets. We're going to see people who are dealing with the same things you're dealing with. Eating sensibly is always great if you have time to do that and access to be able to do that. And remember to have fun. Laughter is good medicine. So always try to find time in your day to laugh. So find good people that you can laugh with. Work with those people. Cherish those people. Because they're the ones that are depending on you too to make them laugh. And so, we talked about these are things that sometimes the time off, those things are things you have to kind of schedule sometimes, and you can't really do immediately. But I also want to make sure we talk about these little 5-minute pick-me-ups. So this was just an article that I found. And again, it's not a be-all, end-all list, but I want to use it so it might strike those other things and make you think of those other things that you'll want to do, that you want to try, right? So the first one up here is to, you don't have the whole day off, but you need 5 minutes to recover. One thing you can do is this number one here is relive a memory photo, right? So not just pull up a photo on your phone and kind of think about it. It's really try to relive it. Think of a memory, even if it's not a picture on your phone, but just a memory in a certain time that you had a lot of fun. And think not just about what you saw, but how, was it warm? How did it actually make you feel? What if there was sand? How did that feel? What was the smell that was in the air? So really using all of your senses in the memory photo and really trying to immerse yourself in that good, almost like thinking of it as your happy place. So try to find that happy place and relive it in a memory photo. A lot of folks will say that it works. And I would encourage you all to try these. I've tried them all. Not all of them work for me. Number 2 does work for me. Slow your breathing. And talking about meditation, but even just to sit down and just think about and slow your breathing, taking deep breaths, can restore your oxygen levels, can provide more calm, and to shake off a lot of that tension. And with doing those things, you are able to get yourself to a calm place and allow your natural ability to refill your well to occur. So breathing is a wonderful, wonderful thing to try. If you haven't tried breathing or even a meditative breathing, you can go to YouTube and find a million meditation recordings. The next one's a big fan favorite, take a chocolate break. It might be a little bit biased because this is based on a 2009 Swiss study, and the Swiss love their chocolate. But they found that eating 1.4 ounces of dark chocolate, which is about a 2-inch square, every day or two, lowered stress hormone levels in people who were feeling highly anxious. They'd half the chocolate at mid-morning and half in mid-afternoons. And it goes on to say that we're talking about dark chocolate here, not the sugary stuff that we typically have sitting around the house, but the dark chocolate also contains antioxidants, which can help to fight the biological effects of stress, provide that small hit of caffeine, and also that endorphin generating taste that we have with chocolate. So you want to make sure again that it's not much those milk chocolates with lots of sugar, but more of kind of almost like the European style dark chocolates and ones that have high cocoa count or whatever the words are, and that will kind of get you back, but also not give you that sugar crash that you would get with some of those other chocolates. So that's a big favorite. So you can go ahead and say, hey, I need a 5-minute chocolate break, and people will hopefully look at you funny. The next one is one I've tried. It doesn't really work for me, but psychologists say it works. Floating your worries away. The idea and concept here is that you think of that worry, whether it's an unpaid bill that you weren't expecting because of a medical emergency. And the idea is you just kind of attach it visually to a balloon and just mentally envision it floating away from you, and floating those worries away. Psychologists will say that it's worked. For me, it just made me laugh a little bit. But for you, it might. And then there's also this thing called fantasy shops. Now, it doesn't mean to just, go on Amazon and just order everything under the sun. But if you've ever sat down and just looked through a magazine, and just flip through the pages just to see what's in there, if you ever kind of paid attention, you'll notice that it actually calms you down pretty good. You kind of settle your breathing, and it can help to just zone out and allow your well to refill a little bit. So those are 5, things you can do at 5-minute clips. So if you've had a real tough go around with a patient, with a family, and you need to just kind of settle yourself, and these are just 5 of an infinite amount of things you can do to refill your wells. And again, take stock of the things that work good for you, and keep them at the ready. All right, so we want to make sure, and these are just some extra little tips we have here, nurture yourself. This is a necessity, not a luxury. A lot of people think, well, I don't have time to do that, or I can't do that because it's too much, or it's lavish. You need to do it. Again, going back to the plain equation where you have to take care of yourself first, you have to put on your mask first. You need to set aside relaxation time. You need to take care of yourself. You need to connect with others. Do something you enjoy every day. Keep that sense of humor. Create balance in your life, whether it's relationships or things that you like to do, and live authentically. We want to make sure we're being ourselves, and being acknowledged for being ourselves. And hiding from that doesn't help you be a good caregiver. So nurturing yourself, don't think of it as a luxury. It's something that you must do in order to be a good caregiver. Some other things just to mention, highlights here. In summary, we want to make sure that we're using other health therapies too. These are things that we cannot, we don't have to just do for ourselves, but if we do these things with the people that we're caring for, sometimes we can get a twofer. We can do these things and help them, but also help ourselves. So things like music therapy, like I said, for me, music really helps me to refill my well, but it also might help a lot of the folks we work with that are going through that suffering. It might help them and us at the same time. Same thing as pet therapy, right? Those things are great. Everyone loves to see a pooch or a bunny, or we actually had a mini pony for a little while, but the logistics became too cumbersome. Gentle touch therapies, even just holding someone's hand while you're caring for them, can help them feel safe, secure, and decrease their pain, but also helps you refill your well. Just the actual touch of someone else's hand can actually do that. Compassionate touch is a kind of a therapeutic thing that's a trademark. There's also Reiki, hospice hand massage, aromatherapy. So lots of these things we can be doing together with those people we're caring for, so that we, even as we're giving out compassion, we're actually filling it while we're doing these things. All right, so those are good things. The last thing I want to work through here, we've got a few minutes left, is the Caregiver Bill of Rights. And we hear a lot of these things with the Bill of Rights for the United States. There's a Bill of Rights for patients when they're admitted to hospitals and nursing homes. But there's also the Caregiver Bill of Rights, right? Because as caregivers, you have rights, and you need to make sure that you understand that your compassion is not limitless, right? And you have to kind of have these notions in the back of your brain in order to continue to be a good caregiver. So we're going to go through these, and you can also think of these as maybe even mantras as you're doing breathing. If one of these really strikes you as something that you have to repeat to yourself, these are things that you can repeat to yourself as you're doing some of your breathing exercises. The Caregiver Bill of Rights, and so it says, as a caregiver, I have the right to be respected for the work that you choose to do, because you are choosing to do this. You could do something else. As a caregiver, you have a right to take pride in your work and know that you're making a difference, right? In order to be a good caregiver, you must understand that what you're doing is benefiting them. It's making a difference. As a caregiver, you have the right to garner appreciation and validation for the care you give to others, right? You might not necessarily get that appreciation and validation from the ones you're actually caring for. It might have to come from your caregiving friends and coworkers, or even the family members, because they see how hard you're working to benefit their loved one. You have the right to receive adequate pay for the job as a professional caregiver. Sometimes that it doesn't line up all the time, but we have the rights to do that. You have the right to discern your personal boundaries and have others respect my choices. And that goes back to some of that caregiver vulnerability about people's backgrounds. You have a right to seek assistance from others if and when it's necessary. So make sure you ask for help, especially when it's somebody that can really take a lot out of your will. Ask for assistance. You have the right to take off time to re-energize. Again, if it's a week, weekend, day, 5 minutes, whatever it is, you have the right to take off time to re-energize. You have the right to socialize, maintain your interests, and sustain a balanced lifestyle. You want to make sure you're doing that. You have the right to your own feelings, including any negative emotions like anger and sadness and even frustration and resentment. You absolutely have a right to those negative emotions. You also have an obligation to do something about it. You have a right to convey hope to those in your care. And again, we talked about this earlier, even with hospice patients. We can still have hope for lots of different things, that come with a good death. And the last one's the most important, and it really brings us back to that suffering that we talked about that had the different components. And even when we're talking about hospice care, you need to believe as a caregiver, you have the right to believe that those in your care will prosper in mind, body, and spirit as a result of your caregiving. So even though you're not going to get all the thank yous, I love yous, I appreciate what you've done for me, you're not going to get that all the time. You need to believe in yourself that these people are better off because you were caring for them. And they're better off not just physically, but also in their mind, in their spirit, and in soothing their total pain experience, their total suffering. So you have to, as a caregiver, recognize that even when they don't say thank you or appreciate you, that you are doing great work for them and making their days better, regardless of what they say and or don't say. So make sure you keep that handy when you're having a real rough day. So that's the last slide. I have this one left open for questions and comments. Obviously, this is a pre-recording. We'll see what comes up as we talk about it. So have those questions ready. I'll obviously talk about not just compassion fatigue, but I've been in hospice care now for 20 years. I've been at Old Colony Hospice and Palliative Care for 14 years. So if there's any type of hospice and or palliative care questions that you guys might have, I would be absolutely honored to answer them, either during the post session, or if anyone would want to reach out on email, or just by calling Old Colony Hospice, or you can find us on the web at www.oldcolonyhospice.org. And my name is, again, Mike Cruza. And if you ever wanted to call us, it's 781-341-4145, and you can leave a message on my voicemail, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So thanks for listening, and I look forward to maybe answering some questions as we do the in-person second part to this. Thanks.